Power creep is a tricky topic to cover. Power creep can keep players invested in new cards while turning other players off from the game. Power creep can help make competitive players engaged, but casual players feeling cheated. In reality, power creep is a tool to be used by designers with care, moderation, and careful planning. Hey there, card folk. Speedrobo here. Today I'll be teaching y'all how to plan for proper power creep in your game. Let's go exploring. When creating your very own card game, it is highly recommended to have around 1 full year of content planned and ready to go before you even launch. This means that shortly after you launch your game, you will need to start working on your next year of support. And thus, you'll have to start thinking about how to handle your game's power creep right out of the gate. But why? Why do games need power creep? Well, it's complicated and a bit depressing in all honesty. You need to make sure that players purchase your product. You've got to make money to keep making the game after all. Therefore, power creep is a powerful way to incentivize the purchase of said product. But you have to do it correctly. If you just make all the cards in your new product objectively superior in every way to your old cards, well, that's just going to make your players feel angry and cheated for buying the previous stuff. Blatantly increasing the stats of your cards? Yeah, it's a great way to kill your game. Instead, you need to make cards that are stronger in ways that don't completely eliminate the old cards from being viable, playable, and needed for top-tier decks. Let's get into some nitty-gritty examples. Kicking this off, let's take a look at Buddy Fight Triple D. What Buddy Fight Triple D did to power creep the game was increase flexibility. New archetypes released in this era featured an array of cards with choose one effects, essentially making cards that contained two staple cards in one. The individual effects of these cards were not more powerful than previous effects, and that's what's important. All this did was allow for players to free up deck space by condensing previous staple cards together into one. This is a great way to make your new cards more powerful without blowing out your previous archetypes. Shoutouts to Omni Lords from Buddy Fight 100 and dual cards from Triple D as well. More excellent examples on how to increase flexibility. The next game I want to talk about is Total War Elysium. It's still in beta, but its simple nature lets me use a certain card as an awesome example for this video. It's an example of how to incorrectly prepare your game for power creep in the future. And that card is Supply Train. Supply in Total War is like mana in Hearthstone, so this card lets you gain 1 mana every time you draw. This has no limit to how many times it's activated in a single turn. A lesson that I had to learn the hard way as a card game designer was that if you don't put once per turn on your resource gaining cards, your players will find a way to abuse it. I would strongly recommend that Supply Train needs a limit to between once to thrice per turn at launch. Later on in this game's life, I would recommend releasing a retrain of this card that costs 1 more, but doesn't have the once per turn restriction. Loosening your effect restrictions as your game goes on is a great way to power creep while keeping old cards useful and not making your players feel bad about the progression of your game. This does not mean that you can reduce the cost of your card effects. If gaining 1 card means that you must spend 2 of your game's resource, that must remain true for the entire duration of your game. Do not break your value system. Loosening restrictions in this way gives your combo and control players more wacky and powerful options, while your aggressive players will continue to want to use the older versions. Why? Well, they cost less, and thus can be played earlier, tying into their more aggressive strategies. The third lesson for today is learning how to create power creep that synergizes with old mechanics. If the new, more powerful mechanics and cards require old staples to get the most out of, It still encourages the purchase of new product while keeping the majority of old cards in play. To see what I'm talking about with this, let's take a look at Cardfight Vanguard's Legion mechanic. Legion gave your Vanguard a permanent +9 or so power when attacking, allowed you to shuffle 4 cards back from the drop, and it granted an additional skill depending on the card used. Compare this to the previous mechanic, Break Ride. Break Ride granted a 1-turn +10 and an additional skill. Legion is obviously superior in every way, however, Legion still allowed the use of Break Ride and synergized with it perfectly. You simply rode your Break Ride first, then went into Legion. This activated both your Legion and your Break Ride at the same time. In addition, many Legion cards required the inclusion of old boss cards in the deck to be activated at all. Both of these factors kept the older cards in play and made Legion work well with the Legacy lineup, despite being directly more powerful than the previous mechanics. Compare this to Cardfight's poorly done power creep, Strides. Strides not only commit the cardinal sin of power creep, blatantly bigger numbers, but also don't work at all with Legion or Break Ride. Striding isn't considered a ride, so your Break Rides don't activate with them. Striding also happens before your main phase, thus you can't Legion and Stride together. This resulted in Stride rendering everything else irrelevant except for itself and the deck specifically built to counter it. Not fun. The big takeaway from this video is that power creep is tricky and dangerous. Thus, game designers will need a plan for how to handle it. The examples in this video are a good showcase of the mindset needed to create good and healthy power creep. I've been Speedrobo, and I'll see you later.